Alright, I'm going to install Linux Mint on a VirtualBox virtual machine. So I've got VirtualBox open here. This is a Windows machine that's running VirtualBox, and I want to get a Linux Mint machine installed. You can see that I've already actually got a couple of machines installed, but I want to get a new install. So I'm going to install the latest version of Linux Mint Debian Edition. So the first thing I need to do is go download the ISO for that. Alright, so I've just did a Google search for Linux Mint. This is actually the one that I want right here, the LMDE. But let me just go to the Linux Mint homepage and see what that looks like. Alright, so I'm going to go to the downloads, and what I want is this LMDE 2. That's the Linux Mint Debian Edition. And since I'm going to be running this on a virtual machine, there are two versions that I could install. Well, actually, I've got four versions here. Cinnamon and Mate refer to the desktop sort of graphical environment that's going to be installed. Since we're running this on a virtual machine, we're not going to have a lot of processing power, and Mate is a sort of a low-powered desktop environment. And then we can choose between 32 and 64-bit. And again, since we're running it on a virtual machine, if our VirtualBox setup is configured to support 64-bit operating systems, then we could download the 64-bit, but really the 32-bit version is going to be fine for what we're going to be doing, especially since it's in a virtual machine. So I click on the 32-bit link, and I basically get a list of links here that are all links that I could use to download the ISO. I'm going to pick one of these links in the US, so hopefully it'll be a fast download, and I just need to, click on one of these to download the ISO. And so I see that the ISO is downloading, and it's 1.5 gigs. It looks like it's going to take a while, so now I just wait. Okay, now that I've got the ISO downloaded, I'm going to create a virtual machine and then do an install on that virtual machine. So this is VirtualBox, and I'm going to create a new virtual machine. I'm going to, the first question is, what is the new operating system going to be? I'm going to type in Mint Debian Edition. And I'm going to make this virtual machine, I'm just going to make this virtual machine 32-bit since we already have downloaded the 32-bit ISO. The next question is about memory size, and this is how much RAM your new machine is going to have. And a good choice for this, you shouldn't make this larger than the amount of RAM that you have, but a good choice for this would be like 1 gigabyte, which would be 1024 megabytes, or 2, right? 1 or 2 gigabytes should be fine. I'm just going to go ahead and put 2, which is 2048 megabytes here. And then the next question is about how big the virtual hard disk should be. The default is 8 gigabytes, which is probably going to be too small. So I'm going to create a new virtual disk, and I'm going to set the size to be larger than 8 gigabytes. The type of virtual disk that I'm going to use is just a VirtualBox disk image, so just the VDI. And then I'm going to tell it to dynamically allocate this. So I'm going to set the hard drive to be 20 gigabytes, but I'm going to let VirtualBox dynamically allocate that, which means that the file that it uses for the hard drive is not going to start off at 20 gigabytes. It will only be however big it needs to be to store the files for the virtual machine. And then as I create more files, that file that is used for the hard drive is going to increase in size. So dynamically allocated is good. And then here's where I choose the size. So I don't want 8 gigabytes, that's going to be too small. So I'm going to go over here to, actually, let me just type in 20. I want to go to 20 gigabytes. Create the disk. And my virtual machine has been created. So I've got Mint Debian Edition here. I can go through and look at some of the settings here, like the general setting. It shows me that, I've got a Linux OS that I'm planning on installing. Let's see here, is there anything useful here? No. I could go in and change the memory size, so that choice of 2 gigabytes for my RAM is not permanent. I can go in here and change this. I can set up multiple monitors if I want. We're not going to be able to, or we're not going to do any multiple monitor stuff here. I can change what the storage devices look like on the machine. So if I wanted to add a hard drive, or I wanted to add a CD-ROM or something like that. And then the one that I would be interested in, or you'll probably be interested in, is the network setup. And so for most of what we're going to do, just setting up the network adapter to be a NAT will be fine. And what that is going to do is it's going to make your virtual machine use your actual host computer's network configuration to communicate with the internet. So your host machine is going to look like a router to the virtual machine. Now that does mean that the virtual machine is not going to get its own IP address. It's going to get sort of a local IP address that that it'll use. So you will not be able to access it from outside of the host machine. And if you don't know what that means, then it doesn't matter, right? This is going to be perfectly fine. The only other thing that you might have to do is if you go into the USB section and you enable the USB controller, sometimes the USB 2.0 driver is not installed. And if you just want to be safe, you can click on the USB 1.1 driver. When you go to start your virtual machine, it'll complain about a USB driver. If it does, this is the solution. Just switch it back to 1.1. Alright, so there's my system configuration. I changed the USB to be 1.1 instead of 2.0. Now I want to do the install. So in order to do the install, essentially what I do is I've got a software version of a computer. So this thing looks like a computer to my operating system. And so what I need to do is virtually insert the, hold on, I clicked on something so you couldn't see that. What I'm going to do is virtually insert the installation CD, and I downloaded the installation CD to an ISO. If I was going to do this on a real machine, what I would do is burn that ISO to a CD, and then I would put that CD in my machine, and I would boot up the machine and do the install. So this is the insert the ISO into the machine part. This top line here says controller IDE. This is the virtual CD-ROM. And it says right here that the virtual CD-ROM is empty. So if I click on empty, I go over here to the right, I've got a little CD image. I can basically choose an ISO that I want to use as the CD that I'm going to put into the virtual machine. Alright, so I click on this. You can see that I've got, if you use multiple ISOs, there will be a list of ISOs that you've used in the past. I need to click on a new virtual optical disk file. This is going to be in my downloads directory, and this is the ISO that we downloaded. So I'm going to click on that, and I click open, and now I see that the virtual CD-ROM has got an ISO loaded, so it is, when I boot the machine, it is going to appear to have something in the CD-ROM. So I click OK here. And now it's time to boot up the virtual machine. So I'm going to highlight the Mint Debian Edition if it's not already highlighted, and then I'm going to click Start. And this is going to pop up with a window, which is the virtual machine starting. Now I've put a CD into the virtual CD-ROM, and that's what's loading right here. So it's got Linux Mint in the CD-ROM, and it booted from the CD by default, so it's going to load the Linux Mint installation disk. And so this window is basically, right, you can move this around, but this is your virtual computer. We've created a computer that is inside this window, and to the operating system, the computer looks like it has a processor, it looks like it has RAM, it looks like it has a CD-ROM, it looks like it has a hard drive. So it's all being emulated by software, but we can do a standard Linux install right on top of the virtual machine. The nice thing about this is you don't have to try to dual boot your computer. You don't have to delete any of your computer files. You can try out Linux without making any modifications to your current machine, just so that you don't have to worry about messing something up and it being catastrophic. Alright, so we got to wait for this boot CD or the install CD to boot up. And the way that the Linux Mint install CDs work, they're similar to the Ubuntu CDs, is that they boot up into a live mode. So you basically get a Linux Mint installation that's running, and it's running right off of the CD-ROM. And what we want to do is we want to install Linux Mint onto this virtual machine, and so we need to run the install Linux Mint button here. So I'm going to double click on that. I mean, you can test out Linux Mint like this. You could look at some of the programs that it has installed. It looks like it's got Firefox installed and a terminal. So you can actually use the live CD to do some work, but we know we want to install it, so we're just going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to see if I can make this window bigger. There we go. And you can see that the install CD is already set up to be aware of a virtual machine because it dynamically increased the screen size, what it believes the screen size to be when I change the window size. Alright, so language for us, most of us I guess, is going to be English. I need to pick a time zone. Chicago is Central Time, that's where we're at. I need to pick a keyboard. The default is perfectly fine, so it's English US. So now I need to choose I need to set up my user account that I'm going to use to log into the machine. So you need to put your name here. And then you need to select a username. And the username is essentially whatever you want. So if you've got a computer alias, just use that for your username. My standard username that I use for all machines is my first initial and my last name, so C. Clark. And then you need to put in a password. And then this next button is, this selection right here is whether or not you want the machine to automatically log in. Now on a machine that you shared with somebody, you probably wouldn't want to do this, but for this virtual machine, this is actually pretty nice. And all this means is that you're going to, when you start the virtual machine, it's going to start up and then it's going to automatically log into your account so that you don't have to type in your username and password. And then the host name here is going to be the name of your computer, and this, I mean, really isn't going to be important. If we were doing some networking stuff, this would be important, but I'm just going to say Debian VM for Debian Virtual Machine. Alright, so I'm going to go forward here. And the next step is to basically format the hard drive for the Linux install. Now, this is not the hard drive of your host computer, right? This is the hard drive that is attached to the virtual machine. And so what it's telling us here is that there is no partition table found in the hard drive, and it's got a hard disk. It's detected a hard drive that is 21 gigabytes. That's the 20 gigabyte hard drive that I created. And so it's asking if I want the installer to create a partition table, and it says that this is going to erase all data on the disk. Well, there isn't any data on the disk, so that doesn't matter. And this is not your host computer's hard drive, so it's not going to erase any files on your computer. So I click yes here. The installer basically sets up a partition table. If you don't know anything about partition tables, this is perfectly fine. So you just click forward. You can see that it's created two partitions: a swap partition that's 2.2 gigabytes, and then an 18 gigabyte partition for the actual files. So click forward. This is asking me if I want to install Grub, which I do. So the default here is fine. I click forward. It's giving me a summary now. So now I click forward, and it begins the install process. So this is going to take a while. You just got to wait on it, and then when it's done, we'll have an install that's ready to go, and we just reboot the virtual machine and we should have Linux Mint installed. Okay, and so now the install is done, and I get a little pop-up that asks if I want to restart the computer now, and I'm just going to say yes. So it's going to reboot the virtual machine, not my host computer. Okay, now that it's booted up, I see that I actually shouldn't have told it to restart. I should have just shut down. And the reason is because I still see this install Linux Mint. So what happened was it rebooted and it booted off of the virtual CD-ROM again. And I need to remove that CD-ROM, or the CD from the CD-ROM, and boot to the hard drive. So I'm going to have to shut this down. So I'm going to do a quit. Going to do a shutdown. And now I need to go back to the storage section and remove the CD-ROM. Actually, I don't want to remove the attachment. I need to remove this from this. I need to remove the ISO from the CD-ROM. So I go over here to the CD section and do remove disk from virtual drive. Now it says it's empty. Click OK and boot again. So I've got the Mint Debian Edition machine selected. Click Start. Now I'm booting into the installation that I just did. Okay, there we go. So now I've booted into the new install. I've got a little dialog box that pops up. Basically tells me welcome, and then has little buttons that I could click on for more information. This will happen every time I boot up unless I uncheck the show this dialog at startup. So I can close this, and the next time that I boot up, I shouldn't get that pop-up. And I see that the install Linux Mint is gone, and I also see that I have my user's home directory is right here. So this tells me that I'm actually in the fresh install that I just did. And then one thing that I'm going to check to see is if so I've got the ability for this to dynamically increase the screen size, which is a really nice feature. Okay. All right, and that's it. So I've got Firefox browser down here. I've got my terminal open, or my terminal button here. So this is how I get access to a terminal. I've got some stuff down here in the tray that gives me some system information. This is an important one. If you want to keep your system up to date, you just need to, this symbol will change. Instead of it being a green check mark, you'll see a different symbol, and it'll show you a list of updates to install. And the reason that I like this Linux Mint Debian Edition is that this is a rolling release distribution. So instead of like a new version coming out every year, basically, as long as you just keep installing your package updates, then you are at the latest release version. So when you see packages that show up here, you can just click on Install the Updates. It'll install them, and then you'll be at the latest version of the Mint Debian Edition. All right, and that's it. The last thing I'll show you is, if we want to go into, we can make this look as if it's just our, make the virtual machine look like it's our actual computer by setting the view to full screen mode. So if I go to full screen mode, which is right here, then I can get the virtual machine screen to take up my entire monitor. The one thing that I do have to pay attention to, though, is to get out of full screen mode, I'm going to have to hit the host key, which is a key that is defined by the virtual box. And in this case, it tells me that my host key is F1. So to get out of full screen mode, I have to hit the host key plus F. So when I want to exit full screen mode, I'm going to have to hit F1 and F together. So I need to know what the host key is but to get out of the full screen mode. So I can switch, and I just get the desktop showing up on the entire screen. There we go. Actually, I guess I don't have to hit the host key F1, because if I bring my mouse down to the bottom here, I can see that I've actually got some menu items, and I can, for example, minimize this. All right, I can minimize the virtual machine. So I'm gonna just turn off the virtual machine, and that's it. We've got Mint Debian Edition installed and ready to go.